Topic of legal and human problems. Eatchiel, להיתירא, Eatchiel, Zevachim, Daf Yomi Beit. The way we look at a halachik shaila, and we've often talked about whether a halachik shaila is something that is in need of halachik clarification or is it in need of solving of a human problem, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we take yesterday's ideas a little bit further. Yesterday we talked about shvicha and zrika, two different ways of disposing of the blood at the Beis Hamikdash, one by pouring it at the foundation and one is by sprinkling it on the corners. And the Rambam says that it's interesting that shvicha, there's just one way to do shvicha. If you have to pour it onto the foundation, there's one way to do it. When it comes to zrika, there are all sorts of different ways of sprinkling it. How many are corners? Where on the corners? Where does the kohen stand? You go around the base of the mizbeach, or don't you? Movement is somewhat of a dance, a little bit like in the Yom Kippur avodah, when you do achas v'shnayim, one on the top, one on the bottom. There's movement and gesture in the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash, and there's nuance and subtlety in the way the kohen moves. And shvicha is a downward pouring; it's a certain type of a gesture. Zrika is an upward throwing; it's a completely different type of a gesture. And there are different subtleties in the different types of gestures, which leads Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov to tell us about a machlokes Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding a situation where a person had sprinkled twice for a korban chatos, which needs 4 sprinklings. A korban chatos needs a sprinkling on each of the 4 corners of the mizbeach. He had done it twice, or other korbanos which only need 2 sprinklings, one around each corner or each diagonal corner. So that way you're covering the 4 sides of the mizbeach, although you're only touching 4 corners. So it's 2 sprinklings, except for a korban chatas, which needs 4 sprinklings. If you did 2 sprinklings for a chatat or 1 for the others, matirot umefaglot, that allows the meat to be eaten. So the idea of the blood service that we talked about yesterday is not just the importance of it as a kapora, as an atonement for the owner, but it also is matir, the basar, for the kohen. That allows the kohen to eat the meat. Until then, the meat is asur, the meat cannot be eaten. Once the blood has been thrown, the kohen can access the meat. So 1 sprinkling for a korban or 2 for a chatas allows the meat for the kohen, but since that first one is the critical one, yes, you're supposed to do 2, or you're supposed to do 4, but you only did 1 or 2 respectively. That first one does the trick. That's the one that does it. You're supposed to continue. There's more to come, but once you've done the one, it's already activated the effect of the zrika, the meat becomes mutar, and therefore it's also mefagel. That means that first sprinkling, if you had the wrong thought, if you thought chutz lizmano, for example, if you had in mind that you're going to eat it at a different time when you shouldn't be eating it, the whole idea of pigul that we've been discussing, if the wrong thought is applied to that 1 sprinkling, which is the qualifying sprinkling, it doesn't matter what you do with the rest of them. You don't need a disqualifying thought on all of them. If you've simply had a disqualifying thought on one of them, that is pigul. Beit Hillel omrim achat shebechatat v'achat shebechol hazvachim. Beit Hillel says it's only 1 for a chatat and 1 for the other zvachim. A chatat is no different to zvachim in that sense. Even for a chatat, the first sprinkle is the qualifying sprinkle. And as such, the first sprinkle is matir, the korban. Once 1 sprinkle has been done, the korban can be eaten, the meat can be eaten by the kohanim, and it becomes liable for pigul. It becomes a potential pigul. The Gemara goes on for the question. Let's do the question, then I'll tell you the difficulty. Rabbi Yeshaya says, it comes out that in this situation, Beit Shammai is mekel. Beit Shammai says there's no pigul unless you've had bad thought for 2 sprinklings in the case of a chatat. If you only had a bad thought in 1 sprinkling, it doesn't damage the korban. Beit Hillel says, no, even 1, you've already damaged the korban. So Beit Hillel is machmir and Beit Shammai is mekel. This should have been listed in Adius, in the 4th parak of Adius, among the situations, the few situations where Beit Hillel takes a more severe view than Beit Shammai. Rava answers that, and we'll see the answer in a moment. The question is a little bit difficult because of a Tosfos in Ksubis, where Tosfos says the only time, based on a Yerushalmi, there are only certain times where you consider this as a chumrah of Beis Hillel. But technically, this wouldn't categorize. Why is the Gemara considering that this is a chumrah of Beis Hillel? From the Yerushalmi quoted in the Tosfos in Ksubis, it would seem that this should not be part of that category considered as one of the chumras of Beit Hillel. Don't worry about the technicality of that unless you go into the Tosfos. What is important is the answer, and part of my wanting to share the answer with you is to introduce the Chok Nosson to you, because he's somebody really important. The Chok Nosson is Reb Nosson ben Avrom Bourgil, who lived in Tunisia in the late 18th century. So while we've got this rich world of Torah taking place in Eastern Europe, you've got the Vilna Gaon, you've got the Noda B'Yehuda, you've got Rabbi Kiva, you've got all these wonderful people producing the most incredible Torah in Eastern Europe. At the same time, in North Africa, there are amazing things going on. We weren't as aware of what was going on in North Africa as we are becoming aware. But this Reb Nosson ben Avrom, we were aware of. And the person who made us aware, and I'm going to tell you why he's so precious to me. The person who made us really aware of him at that time was the Chidor. The Chidor lived in Eretz Yisrael, but he used to travel a fortune to go and raise money for Hebron and other communities, mainly for Hebron, and he traveled the world. And he went to Tunisia and he met Reb Nosson ben Avrom there and was enormously impressed with him. And writes about him in the Shem HaGedolim, this amazing Gadol. So he was a Dayan and he was a Roshei Yeshiva, and he was a specialist in Kodshim. He loved Kodshim, he was a specialist in Kodshim, and he wrote on Kodshim. What's interesting is the Chok Nosson, the question I've just explained to you or just mentioned to you from the Tosfos and Ksubis, is a question that was asked to him by Reb Mordechai Halevi from Izmir, from Turkey. He says Reb Mordechai Halevi was visiting him from Turkey. He had come to raise some money for shuls in Turkey. See, in those days, they used to also have to travel to raise money, and that's how Torah spread. So you've got a Rosh Yeshiva from, a Rov from Turkey traveling to Tunisia, meeting the Chok Nosson in Tunisia, asking him a question which stimulates the Chok Nosson's answer. But what's interesting to me really is that this Reb Mordechai Halevi from Izmir met somebody else in Tunisia on that same visit. He met the Chidor. So the Chidor and he were there at the same time. So it strikes me along the lines that we sometimes talk about it. But what actually happens, they might have been together in the Beis HaMedrash at the same time. The Chidor might have been sitting there when Reb Mordechai Halevi put this question to the Chok Nosson. The Chidor from Israel, Reb Mordechai Halevi coming from Turkey, meeting in Tunisia. You know, you think that Jared Kushner gets all sorts of people together. Look what happens in the world of Torah. And they come together to discuss this piece of Gemara. The Chok Nosson is really important because he doesn't quote anybody. This is rare that he quotes Reb Mordechai Halevi. He doesn't quote. And in our day of everything is just a collection of this person said that, and this person said that, and you get the sheets of everybody says everything, to have an entire sefer with no quote. It's all reasoned out. It's all thought out. And he prides himself of that. And particularly in the Sephardi world, because the Sephardi world really does learn that way a lot. The Sephardi world does anthologize a lot and collect different views together and look at them. So he's quite an innovator in the North African world, in the way he learns. And he doesn't even have a haskoma. So he's completely independent. He does his own thing. He doesn't, in front of his sforim, one of the few sforim of the time, of any time, that doesn't have an endorsement from other gedolim. He's not interested in what anybody else says. This is how I learn. Take it or leave it. And the world took it. The world took it so much that the Chofetz Chaim says he learned Kodshim from beginning to end with the Chok Nosson. And the Chofetz Chaim published the Asifas Zakenim, which is an anthology of 4 Perushim on Kodshim. Because there was such a dearth of Perushim on Kodshim, the Chofetz Chaim wanted to encourage people to learn Kodshim, so he published the Asifas Zakenim, which is a compilation of 4 Perushim on Kodshim, one of which is the Chok Nosson. So that's the kind of credibility that he gained in the Ashkenazi world as well as the Sephardi world. The Chidor is very interesting because he's a mix of Ashkenazi. His father was Sephardi, his mother was Ashkenazi. So he brings together, he lived he came from Africa, he lived from Morocco, his family came from, he lived in Israel, he lived in Italy, in Livorno. All very, very interesting. In fact, I discovered that the first edition of the Chok Nosson was published in Livorno 2 years before the Chidor got to Livorno. I don't know whether that's coincidental or not, but there's that interesting intersection. Anyway, what he explains is that what's unique about this situation and makes it perplexing of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is that in the same din there is a chumrah and a kula. It's not a chumrah for one and a kula for the other, which is the case that Tosfos is talking about in Ksubis. It's in the same din. That one zrika, in the case of chatat, that first sprinkling, has a kula in it, The kula is the kohanim can eat the meat immediately. Kapora has taken place immediately, and the chumra is pigul applies immediately. So in and of itself there is a chumra and a kula. Therefore, it should be included in the chumras and kulas of Beis Hillel, or the chumras of Beis Hillel, the more severe views of Beis Hillel in the fourth perek of Edius. So what does the Gemara answer? Omale rova ki itchil lehetera itchil dahavalu Beit Shammai lechumra. The Gemara answers a strange thing. Rova says, yeah, but the question was about, can we eat the meat? Beis Hillel says, yes, after one sprinkling you can eat the meat. Says Beit Shammai, oh no, you need 2 sprinklings before you can eat the meat. And in that situation, Beit Shammai is the machmir. So although it's true, as far as pigul is concerned, Beit Hillel takes the more severe view. As far as the heter achila is concerned, the right to eat it, Beit Shammai takes the harder view, and that was the issue, that was the question. What's really interesting to look at is the Rashi, ki itchil Mishnah beveis hamedrash tchila v'nechlik alei. When this Mishnah was asked first in the Beis Hamedrash, Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel had this discussion, and Rashi goes on to explain, nishala omad hashoel v'shoal. And a person got up and asked the question, Natan matana achat bechatat v'nishpach adam hutru ha'amirim v'abasar olo. Once, if the blood was sprinkled once and then the blood was spilt and lost, can the meat be eaten or can't it? And then Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai get involved. What's interesting is, if you'll notice on the next page of the sources, I bring the Bach affirms the way we have Rashi. This Mishnah was discussed in the Beis Hamedrash. That means there was a theoretical question. They're learning a Mishnah in the Beis Hamedrash, and somebody's asking a theoretical question. But look at the Shita Mukubetzis. He says, Itchil matana achat beveit hamedrash. He says there's a mistake in the Rashi. It's not Itchil Mishnah zu beveit. The question was, matana achat beveis hamedrash. What the Shita Mukubetzit is saying is there was a person with a problem. We've got a situation in the Beis Hamikdash. Somebody has done one sprinkling and the blood got lost. And that's why Rashi goes into the detail of the blood got lost. Who cares what happened to the blood? That's not the question. The question is just, what is the status of the meat after one sprinkling? No, says Rashi, there's a human problem. Can I eat the meat or can't I? Can the meat be salvaged or can't it? That's the issue. And therefore, what we're looking at, explains the Gemara, is the worldview, the approach to psak of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. This is not just a collection of all the cases where Beit Shammai is lechumra and Beit Hillel is lekula, or vice versa. This is the way you look at it. For Beit Shammai, when a matter was brought to a posek for a decision, it was in order to clarify the halacha. The situation just created a scenario that required halachik clarification. So the job of the posek is to clarify halacha. It's to put your nose in the sefer, in the text, and figure out what does it really say, what is the fact, what do we do, and then you apply that. For Beis Hillel, it's much more, as I've told you often, Rav Moshe Feinstein taught me, the job of a rov and a posek is to solve human problems. When halacha creates a human problem, your mind is on the human being. You're empathizing with the person. You're thinking of the person in trouble. You're thinking of this kohen who needs the meat. You're thinking of a kohen whose family is waiting for this meat at home, and it's now been messed up because the blood has been spilt after one's zriko. Can the kohen get it's his turn to eat from the korban? Who knows when he gets another chance? He's been telling his family, they've planned a whole meal around that. They've invited friends. This is going to be the opportunity. It's their korban. And somebody messed up, and after the zrika, they spilt the blood. There was only one zrika. It's a korban chata. There has to be another 3 zrikas. What do you do now? Says Beit Shammai, it's fine. Says Beit Hillel, no, sorry, nothing we can do to help. So in this case, it's a deviation from Beit Hillel's normal view of trying to solve the problem. And in this case, it emerges that the problem is left stuck. And that's why the Gemara says it should have been listed. But says Rava, the fact is we're just talking, at the end of the day, we're just talking about whether the meat can be eaten or not. On the question of whether the meat can be eaten, on that question, Beit Shammai is lechumra. It's true in the whole issue. If you look at the whole issue, it emerges that Beit Hillel takes a lighter view on part of this question. But that wasn't the question. The human problem was, can I eat the meat? On that, Beit Shammai says, no, you cannot eat the meat. There need to be 2 zrikas minimum. And the blood got spilt after 1 zrika. There's nothing I can do. On that issue, Beit Hillel, sorry, I'm rephrasing it because as I put it to you in the earlier part, wasn't quite right. In this situation, Beit Hillel is following his normal approach, the normal approach of solve the human problem. And the way he's able to solve the human problem is that one zrika is enough to qualify the meat. And so you don't have to list this as a case where Beit Hillel is l'chumra. Because considering what the human problem was not pigul, that's an academic problem. That's a problem for Talmidei Chachomim. Is this going to be pigul or isn't it? Nice question. Let's have a shir on the subject. But that's not the shaila that came to the Beis HaMedrash. The shaila that came to the Beis HaMedrash is the family of a kohen with nothing to eat. And on that, Beis Hillel follows his normal approach and says, you can eat it. And Beis Shammai says you can't, because Beis Shammai doesn't look at the human situation as much as he looks at the halachic reality and clarifies the halachic reality in isolation.